She told me I'd die alone. No one to love me. No one to remember me. And for a while, she was right. I watched her walk away, hand in hand with the man she said was everything I wasn't. She smiled when she said goodbye, as if my pain was entertainment. But pain has a way of teaching you who you are. Years passed. I rebuilt. I rose from the ashes she left behind. And when the world turned its back on her, she came knocking on mine. Funny, isn't it? How the ones who break you are always the ones who return when you've healed. But this time, I wasn't waiting. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Revenge by Sophia channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. It was raining that night, not the kind of soft rain that cools the air, but the heavy kind that drowns the sound of everything else. I remember the streetlights glowing in the puddles outside her window, flickering like broken stars. She stood across from me, arms folded, eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. Her voice didn't tremble. It was sharp, almost proud. "You'll die alone," she said, like she was declaring a fact, not hurling a curse. The room fell silent after that. Even a clock on the wall seemed to pause. I wanted to ask her why she hated me so much, why love turned to disgust, but my throat was tight, my words trapped behind disbelief. And then she smiled, just slightly. That small, cruel smile that told me she didn't care anymore. The sound of the rain grew louder, like the world itself was mocking me. And I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of person smiles while breaking someone like that? Her eyes used to be warm. That's what I remember most. The kind of eyes that made you believe in safety and forever. But that night, they were different. Empty. Like the person I loved had already left her body, and only her shadow remained. She moved closer, brushing past me, whispering, "You were never enough. You never will be." Her perfume lingered, sweet and painful, mixing with the scent of wet pavement from the open window. I could hear her packing her things, the sound of zippers and drawers closing like a rhythm of endings. I stood there, numb, watching her take everything she wanted and leave behind everything she didn't. When she finally walked out the door, she didn't even look back. And that silence that followed me long after she was gone. Because sometimes, the last thing someone says to you becomes the loudest sound in your life. After she left, I sat on the floor, surrounded by echoes of her voice. The rain outside had stopped, but the storm inside me had just begun. I looked around the empty room. The coffee mug she used, the chair she once curled up in, all of it felt haunted. I kept replaying her words over and over. "You'll die alone," like a curse I couldn't escape. But somewhere in that pain, something shifted. I whispered to myself, quietly, almost too weak to mean it, "Not like this." I didn't know how or when, but I promised that one day, I'd rise again. And when that day came, she'd see the man she tried to destroy standing taller than ever. I didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my becoming. The sound of the door closing was soft, almost too soft for what it meant. It didn't slam. It whispered. And somehow that made it worse. Through the half-open curtains, I watched her step into the night. The rain had slowed, leaving the pavement slick and glistening under the streetlights. She walked beside him. The man she once swore was just a friend. They laughed, their voices fading into the distance, blending with the hum of the city. I stood there frozen, a ghost watching my own life being erased. Every step she took away from me felt like a nail sealing a coffin. Mine. A part of me wanted to run after her, to shout, to demand an explanation. But what do you say when the person you love has already chosen someone else? The night swallowed her figure, and the silence that followed was colder than the rain. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't coming back. Days passed, but it felt like time stopped inside that apartment. The sunlight came in through the blinds, but it never reached me. Everything she left behind carried her scent, her jacket on the chair, her hair tie on the table, her favorite mug with lipstick on the rim. I told myself I'd throw them away. I didn't. I couldn't. Every corner reminded me of something. Laughter in the kitchen, whispered promises in the dark, plans we made that never mattered anymore. The clock ticked louder than usual. My phone stayed silent. Sometimes I thought I heard her footsteps outside my door, but it was always just the wind. I started sleeping on the couch, because the bed still felt like hers. Each night I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how love could disappear so fast. And each morning, I'd wake up wishing I hadn't. Because heartbreak doesn't hurt all at once, it kills you slowly, day by day. One evening, I stood by the same window where she once told me I'd die alone. The world outside was quiet now. The lights, the cars, the people, all moving on, while I stood still. I thought about calling her, just to hear her voice. Just to feel something familiar again. But I didn't. My hands trembled, my heart screamed for her. But my pride, it whispered louder. I won't beg for love, I said out loud, my voice breaking halfway through. Maybe I was saying it to her. Maybe I was saying it to myself. Because deep down I knew she didn't want me anymore. And if I ever wanted to live again, I had to stop wanting her. But in the silence that followed, I still couldn't help but wonder. If love could fade this easily, was it ever real at all? Nights turned into weeks, and weeks into something I stopped counting. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a tomb filled with echoes of her laughter. I'd wake up at strange hours, hearing her voice in the back of my mind, calling my name softly the way she used to, but it was never real. Just memory playing tricks again. I stopped answering calls from friends. I told them I was fine, that I just needed space, but really, I didn't want anyone to see how empty I'd become. Food lost its taste. Music hurt to hear. Even my own reflection looked unfamiliar, like I was watching someone else slowly disappear. And through it all, her words replayed again and again. You'll die alone. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a prophecy I was starting to believe. And sometimes, in the quietest hours, I wondered if she was right. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks, tracing them like maps of my own brokenness. The streetlight outside cast long shadows across the floor, tall, thin, almost human-shaped, and sometimes I'd swear I saw her silhouette standing by the door. The mind does strange things when it's desperate. I started scrolling through her photos, one by one, like I was trying to relive the moments before she changed. Her smile, her eyes, her hand in mine, I knew it was poison, but I couldn't stop. And then one night, her profile disappeared.
Gone. Blocked.
It hit me harder than her words ever did. It was the digital version of a door slamming in my face. I sat there for hours, the glow of the screen fading into darkness, thinking, maybe she didn't just leave me. Maybe she erased me. There's always a moment, a small one, when you realize you've fallen too far. For me, it was the night I found one of her old notes tucked inside a book. It was nothing special, just a reminder she'd written months ago. Don't forget to pick up milk. Love you. Simple. Meaningless. But the way her handwriting curved, the way those two words, love you, looked on the paper, it shattered me. I dropped to the floor and cried like I hadn't in years. No shame. No control. Just raw pain spilling out into the emptiness. When the tears finally stopped, the room was completely silent. My eyes burned, my chest ached, but something inside me felt empty. Too empty. And in that emptiness, I whispered to myself, no one's coming to save you. That was the first night I realized, if I ever wanted to survive, I'd have to learn how to save myself. It began one morning, weeks after the worst of it. The sky outside was dull, pale gray, the kind that gives no promise of sun. But for some reason, that day I got up early. I made coffee the way I used to when life still had meaning. The taste was bitter, but it felt real. I cleaned the apartment, not to forget her, but to reclaim it. Every mug, every folded blanket, every empty corner I once avoided. I threw out her jacket, her old notes, the traces that tied me to someone who no longer existed. And though my hands trembled, I didn't stop. The more I cleaned, the lighter the air felt, like I was washing paint off the walls. When I finally sat down, exhausted and alone, the silence didn't hurt as much as before. It was still silence, but this time, it belonged to me. Days turned into a strange kind of routine. I started going for walks at night, through empty streets glowing under soft yellow lamps. The city felt peaceful, lonely, yes, but peaceful. I began talking to strangers again, small conversations in coffee shops, at bus stops, at work. Nothing deep, but enough to remind me I was still human. Sometimes, when I passed places we once visited, the memories would rise up like ghosts. But I didn't run from them anymore. I let them hurt for a moment, and then let them go. I bought new books, cooked simple meals, listened to music I once avoided. I wasn't happy, not yet, but I was moving. And that was something. Because maybe healing isn't loud or sudden. Maybe it's just a quiet decision to keep going, even when the past still whispers your name. But late at night, when I looked out the window, I still caught myself wondering, did she ever think about me, too? Months passed. My reflection started to look different, not because I'd changed how I looked, but because of how I carried myself. I began working harder, pushing myself into things I'd once avoided, learning new skills, chasing small goals, meeting new people. I wasn't trying to prove her wrong anymore. I was trying to prove myself right. There were still bad days, mornings where the bed felt heavy, nights where loneliness came back like an old enemy. But those days no longer destroyed me. Each scar, each memory, each echo of her voice, they all became proof of what I'd survived. I realized I didn't need her to see my worth anymore. I could see it for myself. And somewhere deep down, a thought began to form, soft but steady. Maybe the version of me she left behind wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was only the beginning. It started without warning, a small promotion at work, a project that suddenly took off, people noticing me for the first time in years. It felt strange at first, like the world was finally paying attention after pretending I didn't exist. I didn't celebrate. I just smiled quietly, because I knew what it had cost to get here. I worked late nights, not out of obsession but purpose. My apartment, once filled with ghosts, now hummed with life. Soft music, fresh coffee, the sound of typing. I still remembered her voice sometimes, whispering those cruel words, "You'll die alone." But now they didn't hurt, they fueled me. It was like every step forward was a small rebellion against her prophecy. And deep down, I realized something. Success doesn't shout. It whispers in moments of peace, when the world finally starts seeing what you've built from the ashes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this calm wouldn't last forever. Time has a way of rewriting people's opinions. The same faces that once looked past me now smiled when I entered a room. Old friends reached out, curious about how I'd been, as if my pain had turned me into something worth knowing again. I was invited to places I'd never been before. Dinners, events, conversations filled with ambition and admiration. And though I wore polite smiles, inside I stayed quiet. Because I knew the truth. The world doesn't love you for who you are. It loves you for who you've become. One evening, standing before a crowd after presenting my work, I caught my reflection in a mirror across the room. The man staring back was confident, steady, alive. Not perfect, but real. For a moment, I felt pride instead of pain. But as the applause echoed, I couldn't help but wonder. If she saw me now, what would she think? Even as life moved forward, the past had a strange way of whispering back. Some nights, I'd dream of her. Not as she was, but as she might be now. Her face faded with time, but her voice remained clear, echoing in my mind. "You'll die alone." Those words no longer haunted me. They reminded me how far I'd come. But part of me still wanted her to see. Not for revenge. Not for validation. Just so she'd understand what she'd lost. One night, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon her name again. Faint, unexpected, like a ghost brushing past. A photo. A caption. A glimpse of a life that didn't look as golden as she once promised herself it would be. And I felt something strange, not hate, not love, just curiosity. Because I knew, deep down, the story between us wasn't finished.
Not yet.
It happened on an ordinary evening. I was sitting at my desk, half asleep over paperwork, the hum of the lamp filling the silence. My phone buzzed once, a simple vibration, nothing unusual. But when I looked down, my chest tightened. Her name. After all these years. 2 words glowed on the screen. Can we talk? For a moment, I thought it was a mistake, some trick of exhaustion. I blinked, but it was still there. The same name I deleted, blocked, buried 100 times in my mind. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I didn't answer. I just stared, feeling the ghost of her voice whispering behind those words. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, slow and heavy, as if the world itself sensed what was coming. After years of silence, why now? Why me? I didn't reply that night. I couldn't. Instead, I lay awake in bed, the phone screen lighting up the darkness every few minutes, her message still unread, her name still there. My mind raced backward through time, to the sound of her laughter, to that final night when she told me I'd die alone. Did she remember that? Did she remember what she did to me? Sleep wouldn't come. Every shadow in the room seemed to whisper her name. Every flicker of light felt like a reminder of what I'd buried. By morning, I convinced myself I wouldn't reply. That part of my life was over. But then another message arrived.
Please.
I just want to explain. And with that, the past cracked open again, slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. What could she possibly explain after all this time? I gave in 2 nights later. Not out of weakness, at least that's what I told myself, but out of curiosity. I needed to hear her voice one last time, if only to silence the ghosts. When I called, she answered on the first ring. Hello. Her voice was softer now, fragile, almost unfamiliar. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed around every word I'd rehearsed for years. Then she whispered, I've missed you. The world around me fell still, no sound, no movement, just that voice bleeding through the speaker like an old wound reopening. I didn't know if I wanted to scream, or hang up, or ask why. But before I could choose, she said something that made my heart stop. I need to see you, please. And just like that, everything I'd built, all my calm, all my peace, began to shake again. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place she used to love. I arrived early, my hands steady, but my heart pacing like it remembered something my mind wanted to forget. Rain tapped against the glass windows, soft and rhythmic, like an old song repeating itself. And then she walked in. For a moment, the whole room seemed to pause, conversations fading, lights dimming, the air thick with memories. She looked different. Her hair shorter, her eyes tired. The confidence she once wore like armor had vanished. What replaced it was something fragile, almost frightened. When our eyes met, time folded in on itself. Every wound, every word, every night I'd spent alone came rushing back. She smiled, nervously. You look good. And all I could think was, so this is what guilt looks like. We sat across from each other, the silence louder than anything I'd ever heard. She stirred her coffee, even though she hadn't added sugar. I watched her hands shake slightly, the same hands that once held me without fear. I don't know where to start, she said. Try the truth, I replied, my voice calm, almost too calm. She looked down, avoiding my eyes. I made mistakes. I thought I was doing what was best for me. But I hurt you. I know I did. Her words floated in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time. I didn't interrupt.
I didn't ask why now.
I just watched, quietly, as she tried to explain the years she'd erased. Every sentence was a confession dressed as an apology. But as she spoke, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Just empty. And that emptiness scared her more than my rage ever could. When she finally looked up, tears shimmered in her eyes. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, she whispered. I didn't see it then. I see it now. I studied her face, the lines, the tiredness, the weight of regret written in every expression. This wasn't the woman who once told me I'd die alone. This was someone broken by her own choices. I nodded slowly. Maybe we both learned something, I said quietly. She reached out, her hand trembling, trying to touch mine. For a moment, I almost let her. Almost. But then I pulled back. Some things, I said, don't come back the same. Her eyes widened, part pain, part understanding. The silence between us stretched, heavy with everything that could never be undone. And as she wiped a tear from her cheek, I realized, sometimes closure doesn't come from getting answers. It comes from realizing you don't need them anymore. The rain outside grew heavier, painting streaks of light down the cafe window. She took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup as if searching for courage. I didn't just leave because I stopped loving you, she began. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and I could tell this was the part she'd never told anyone. I left because I thought I'd found something better. Someone better. I stayed silent, watching her crumble word by word. She went on, her voice trembling. He promised me everything: success, love, a future. I believed him. I thought he saw me in a way you never could. But I was wrong. She looked up, eyes wet but defiant. He used me, and when I had nothing left to give, he threw me away. The hum of the cafe faded. The only sound was the rain, steady, relentless. For a moment, I didn't know if I felt pity or justice. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant, like she was replaying a life she wished she could erase. After he left, she whispered, everything fell apart. I tried to rebuild, but it was never the same. The people, the noise, the so-called friends, they all disappeared when the spotlight dimmed. I could see her trying to hold herself together, but the cracks were too deep. You were the only one who ever saw me, she said, voice barely audible. And I destroyed that. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside went on, strangers passing by, laughter from another table, the faint hiss of the coffee machine, all of it distant, irrelevant. Inside, it was just us, the ghosts of who we were. And though I should have felt satisfaction, all I felt was a strange sadness. Because sometimes seeing someone break doesn't heal you. It just reminds you that pain has a long memory. She reached across the table again, desperate now. I know I don't deserve it, she said, her voice shaking, but can we start over? Even as friends. I looked at her hand, the same hand that once let go without a second thought. Time had changed it.
Softer.
Weaker. Trembling with guilt. I thought about all the nights I'd spent waiting for this moment, imagining what I'd say if she ever came back. How I'd make her regret it, how I'd show her what she lost. But sitting there now, I felt none of that. Only a quiet understanding that some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. You left me to die alone, I said softly. But I didn't. I lived. And that's enough for me. Her eyes filled again, not with tears this time, but with realization. Because she understood then, I wasn't the one who'd lost something.
She was.
After my last words, the space between us turned heavy, like the air itself had stopped moving. She stared at me, searching for something in my eyes that wasn't there anymore. Forgiveness, maybe.
Love.
Or even anger. But all she found was stillness. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came out. She just sat there, the sound of rain and quiet cafe chatter wrapping around us like a fragile wall. I didn't say another word, because sometimes silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you refuse to repeat. I looked out the window instead, watching the streetlights blur through the glass. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting, hoping for one last thread to hold on to. But I gave her nothing. And that was the moment she finally understood what it feels like to be unheard. She whispered my name, her voice trembling. Please, just say something. But what could I say that she hadn't already destroyed? Every apology she offered, every regret she confessed, none of it could fix what had been buried years ago. I sipped my coffee slowly, calm and deliberate. There's nothing left to say, I murmured. Her face fell. Her hands tightened around the cup until her knuckles went white. For years, I dreamed of this moment, of watching her break the way I once did. But now that it was happening, there was no joy in it. Only peace. And that peace was louder than revenge. She looked away, her eyes glistening as she realized the truth. She couldn't hurt me anymore. The power had shifted, and it wasn't mine because I took it back. It was mine because I no longer needed hers. After a long silence, I stood up. My chair scraped softly against the floor, echoing through the quiet cafe. She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't expected me to leave first. "Take care of yourself," I said, simple, final, unshakable. Her lips trembled, as though she wanted to ask me to stay, to listen, to give her one more chance. But she didn't. She couldn't. I walked toward the door, the rain outside waiting for me, like an old friend. When I stepped into it, the cold drops felt clean, washing away what was left of her shadow. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of her crying, muffled by the glass. But I didn't look back, because the truth is, sometimes silence isn't cruelty. It's closure. And that was the only ending she was ever going to get from me. The rain had stopped by the time I reached the street. The world smelled of wet pavement and distant earth, that rare, clean scent after a long storm. Cars passed by, their headlights carving streaks of gold through the mist. I walked aimlessly, hands in my pockets, each step lighter than the last. For years, I carried her memory like a wound, reopening it every time I thought about what she did. But tonight, for the first time, it didn't ache. It was just a story, one that had finally reached its last page. The city lights reflected in the puddles, shimmering like fragments of a life I no longer belonged to. And for once, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure from her. Because I had already found it, in the silence, in the walking away in myself. Later that night, I sat by the window in my small apartment. The air was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. I thought about everything, the love, the loss, the years that vanished like smoke. She had once told me I'd die alone. But as I sat there, surrounded by peace, I realized something. Solitude isn't the same as loneliness. Loneliness is when you crave someone who's gone. Solitude is when you stop needing them. I picked up an old photo of us, faded, edges curled. We looked happy.
Young.
Naive. I smiled faintly, not in pain, but in gratitude. Because that version of me had to break, so this one could exist. And in that moment, I understood. Every betrayal, every silence, every tear was a lesson in disguise. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, filling the room with gold. It was warm, the kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. I opened the window and let the wind in, carrying with it the sound of life outside. Children laughing, a dog barking, a street vendor calling out. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own world. I was here, present,
Free.
As I looked out over the waking city, a thought crossed my mind. She might still think about me. Maybe she even dreams of what we could have been. But that's her burden now, not mine. I've moved on, quietly, completely, beautifully. And that, perhaps, is the sweetest revenge of all. They say revenge is best served cold. But I've learned the sweetest kind of revenge is peace. She thought I'd crumble without her. But what she didn't realize was that some hearts don't die, they evolve. Every scar she left became a map, guiding me to the person I was meant to become. Now, when she sees me, she doesn't see the man she broke. She sees the ghost of her own mistakes. And that, perhaps, is punishment enough. Because sometimes, you don't need to destroy someone to make them feel your absence. You just have to live well enough that they'll never forget what they lost.